Alleluia. Om Mani Padme. Om. Allah.
Welcome. You're watching Harmony and Diversity. Norm Currie is my name, and for this program we're speaking again to Lindsay McKenzie, who is the co-founder of Betel Australia. Up to this point we've discussed Betel in its application in Spain. What we'd like to cover in this program is the spiritual essence of what's been happening in this story of rehabilitation of heroin addicts. Lindsay, it seems that the dynamics within what we've been talking about with Madrid and Raul and Barcelona, etc., and Paco or whatever, there's another force happening there.
Sure. You
had revelations, and these guys seem to be driven by something which is more than their own will.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, it probably emanates also from the name. Why do we call ourselves? The word actually is Betel, and it's a Spanish word. It's in English we transliterate it from the Hebrew as Bethel.
Oh, okay.
So the Spaniards say Betel, which is we were wondering. After a while, we had to sort of put some kind of structure and legality, legal structure to what we were doing as well, and we decided we had to decide on a name. And we thought, well, what's the name that describes what we do? And it was Elliot, actually. He was just, we were sitting around talking, he was just flicking through, he had his Bible open in front of him, and he came, he said, "You guys, I think I know what it is. I think we know I think I know what the name is." And we were all speaking in Spanish at the time, and he explained Betel. He said, it's when Jacob had this encounter with God that just changed his life in the Old Testament, Jacob the patriarch, and he was that particular night he had this dream of a ladder going to heaven, and he woke up and he said, "This is none other than the house of God." He was actually sleeping in the wilderness, and gateway to heaven. And at those times, you have to understand, we didn't have nice houses. We often squatted in houses that the owner let us do so without any rent because we did them up. But I remember one house, there was no windows, no doors. The guys thought it was just great because there was this, it was theirs, and there was this family atmosphere, albeit with issues, personality issues and that. But they were discovering who God was in the context of living together and having to deal with each other and each other's differences, and of course addictions underlying that. And they said, it doesn't matter, we haven't got any doors or windows, but this is the house of God. And it is literally a gateway to heaven, showing us that heaven is real and we can see it and live it here on earth in a sense. So there is that. Yes, the Bible became. These aliens didn't have any theological training per se, but they understood that God could speak to the most simple person through His Word. And so we said, okay, God could speak to you through that. They said, "Oh, I don't understand Genesis." I said, "It doesn't matter. You'll read something, God will put His light on it. It'll mean something personally to you. That's what you have to share with the next guy."
Yeah. And
so they would take the Bible and realize that you didn't have to be a theologian to understand that God could put, or He could anoint, if you like, for want of a better word, or illuminate a passage, but make it very personal for you, for the reader in that moment. And that became a principle that he could, or the leader could share with the others. So it was risky. They might get it wrong. They might interpret it wrong. It might be heresy going around the place. But I don't think there was a lot of heresy going on.
Well, heresy or not, the outcome was good. So,
well, exactly.
So that's it. Yeah, that's quite groundbreaking. You eventually, the groups evolved into having their own sort of churches and things.
Yes.
They?
Well, because out of these communities, we found family members would say, wow, what's going on with my son? Is there nothing for me in all this? Or is it just those exclusively for those who are living in community? So we said, well, okay, well, we'll have a meeting once a week. You come to that. And that became a church.
Right.
We didn't call it a church. It was like just the meeting. But out of that became friends, boyfriend, girlfriend, parents, neighbours, who just wanted the reality that they saw in these guys whose lives they knew what they were like before. I said, something has changed, and whatever it is, I want it.
Yes.
And they would come along to these meetings where these guys would get up and just share from their heart. It wasn't sort of nicely organised. It was messy church at its best, but it was real, and that was the difference. It was real, and it was lived, and it was for ordinary, simple people.
Yes. And did you see that feeding the family in the sense that some of the distortions which had existed in the past and which may in fact have led to the addiction in a roundabout way, that had changed, it was improved by this?
Absolutely.
Yes.
We saw whole families change. Mum and Dad would come along, and Mum, for particular mums, we found that mums would go into bat with their sons particularly, and leave Dad out in the cold because he'd years ago closed the door on a relationship with his son. Mum would sort of secretly behind the scenes connive to get. And in fact, she was enabling his problem.
Yes.
And they realised that was affecting their marriage, because Dad knew that Mum was keeping stuff from him, that his wife was keeping stuff from him. So all that it didn't all come out at once, but gradually as things, as they matured and received light themselves, they began to see how family relationships could be different and ought to be different. And so this whole enabling the problem, and sometimes we had often, well, I wouldn't say sometimes, it was often we had alcoholic fathers with drug addict sons.
Right.
So the son would get completely transformed. Dad would find himself, all of a sudden, the focus of the family was on his drinking problem and not on the son's drug problem. And he didn't like that. And there was, unfortunately, cases of, Dad sabotaging the rehab, or trying to, because he wanted to feel better about himself. It was more of a selfish thing. But even those things were dealt with just loving, this unconditional love that came through, that Dad, we love you, and Dad, I know you've got a drinking problem, but I love you anyway. And the reconciliation that will come between father and son.
Love and reconciliation, they're absolute key issues, and time closes in on us. We'll go to a break. We'll see you in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity. We're speaking with Lindsay McKenzie, who's the co-founder of Betel Australia. Lindsay, we've gone through the overseas operations, which are pretty impressive and lots of lessons learnt there. You translated that into the Australian context. Can you take us through that?
Sure. We, as I said, we expanded within Spain, and then these guys were on a roll. They were saying, "Look, gee, is there not another city for me?" And I guess because of our backgrounds, the world was very much in our face as well. And I can remember them looking at maps and say, "Well, gee, I wonder what's happening in Italy and France, neighbouring countries." And particularly, I have to say this because it was such a key factor in the opening up beyond Spain, was a guy called Miguel. Now he was one of the earliest leaders. He opened up one of the, I think, the second or third house, but got married to one of the women. And since that, he really wanted to do something, because he was in final stages, and I say he was in the last stages of AIDS. Oh, right. He was not a well man, but he had such an internal fortitude. He said, "Before I die, I know I'm going to die because all the others have, She said, but that's okay. But before I die, I want to open up not just a city, a country. I want to go to Italy. And we said, no, this is not a good idea. You know, we felt responsible too. But he was so insistent. He took a team of guys and he opened up a Betel work in Naples, which is in Italy. It's like the big black bad city of Italy. And so that began a kind of a missions outlook, doing the same thing with other addicts, but in another culture, another language group. And from there we expanded to the UK, etc. And today we're in 23 countries around the world. Now, these are all ex-addicts running the show. And part of that was Australia. We'd made visits, of course, to Australia to and from, and people would say, look, we have a drug problem here. When is Australia going to be on the radar? And we looked at it and we thought, you know, is there anybody really willing? Because we didn't feel we could do that just yet, because we'd in our position, we're still overseeing a lot of works that are opening up fast, and that we needed to be there, or at least nearby. So we sent a team to Australia back in 2005 it was, and it went okay. It was in Sydney. It didn't really get traction. And then after a while, I think it was wrong leadership, perhaps, because sometimes people are not number one leaders, and you try them in that place, but they're actually better as number two, and you discover that. But anyway, so the leaders, we changed leadership, and we moved from Sydney down to Victoria, where I've got a lot of contacts myself. I thought that would be a much better deal for the work. And at that stage, we got hold. My brother found a guest house that was been run down, but it was in the town of Marysville.
Oh, okay. Yep.
And that was in February of 2008. And the work began there. We were teaching these guys to actually run this guest house, and at the same time we had a gardening business going on simultaneously. But we were behind the scenes, if you like, watching them do it, watching them make mistakes too, and correcting those mistakes, and being there with them. And of course, as you know, in February 2009, the Black Saturday fires came by, and that guest house was one of the first buildings to go in Marysville. And sadder than losing a building was losing a long tenure worker, who Bian, her name was. She was there. She'd been with us for 12 years in Spain, and I think the hardest thing for us about the Black Saturday fires was not losing the building, it was losing Bian.
Oh yes, of course.
And out of that we had, there was insurance payouts and all that, but the team was just traumatised.
Yes,
and we had to rebuild the team. And at that stage, we felt it was time for my wife and I. Our children had grown up and were pursuing their different career paths. And we felt that it was time for us to hand over again, get out of the way, and hand over. Because by that stage, we'd moved to Italy to replace Miguel, who finally died. I should have said that. Yeah. And it was time for us to hand over to Italian leadership. And we've been back here in Australia 2 years now, and we're again setting up a community with the same principles as we've been doing in, now I say 23 countries around the world.
Yes, and with excellent outcomes.
And with lots of problems.
Yeah. In the back of my mind, that's sort of rolling through, yes. It's not all gold.
Not all beer and Skittles.
No, absolutely not. But had you expanded outside of heroin addiction? If you've been dealing with...
it started off, of course, that was the big issue. But for example, in Mongolia, it's just alcohol. There are no drugs there. So it's just pure alcohol. And other areas, in India, it's more heroin. It's a mixture. But of course, even in Spain, we were dealing with people with gambling addictions. It wasn't just the heroin. It expanded to other areas of life-controlling problems.
Yes.
And we found in the context of a community where the spiritual element was essential and part of a basic part of what we did, that other addictions could be helped too.
Okay. Okay. That's even more interesting, because the whole issue of addiction, as you'd be aware, there's a suspicion that the need for addiction, or the centre of addiction, comes from the same place in the psyche and in the emotional needs. So it's just how it manifests itself. So you're now in Australia, and do you intend to pursue that for any period of time? Have you got a time limit on your Australian experience?
I think we see this as, wherever we've gone, we've seen it as a long-term project, not just. And I think Australia is certainly going to. It's a challenge to us. It really is, because we're talking about self-financed communities who are peer-driven and peer-led.
Well, we're talking about time, and we've run out of it again. We'll go to a break. We'll be back in a moment.
Mani Allah, Alleluia, Mani Allah.
Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Lindsay McKenzie, who's the co-founder of Betel Australia. And we've covered a long pathway here. We're now in Australia, and I wanted to ask you, Lindsay, about the sorts of addictions that you find mainly coming to you in Australia, allowing for the fact that you're rebuilding. But what's the principal type of addiction you're dealing with?
Alcohol would be the main one. Ice, yes, and heroin. But I'd say more than anything, it's alcohol.
Alcohol, right.
But also too, we're seeing a different demographic here in Australia. The average addict that would come to us, say in the other countries around, they're in their 20s, perhaps 30s. But here in Australia, we're seeing it's mainly towards the 40s, over 40s. We're not seeing young people, or if they do, they ring up with wanting to interview you rather than you interviewing them. It's quite a different dynamic here. And we're having to adjust to that.
Right.
Not so much in changing our principles, but like expectations, having to rework those expectations.
Well, so why do you think you might be getting the older alcohol addicted person and not the young ones? Because there is an issue with young kids and overuse of alcohol.
Exactly. I believe that the issue is, it lies in the word desperation.
Right.
See, over these last 25 years, we've been used to people ringing us up really desperate. And the word desperate gets redefined here in Australia. It's not sort of I've hit a wall, I've got no alternative, I don't know where to go. It's either I go into rehab or I'm dead. It's more like gee, that sounds interesting. I wonder what that would look like. What are my rights and my options in your program? It's more of a curious interest rather than a desperate person at the other end of the phone. And that, I believe, is got a lot to do with the very generous welfare payments that are given to addicts when they're often, if not always, but often categorised as disabled people and getting a disability service pension.
Yes. And so that contrasts dramatically with your experience overseas.
Absolutely, it was a shock to us. It still is, because they are not disabled people; they are able-bodied men and women who are capable of working and capable of living well. We're talking about men who and women who were sleeping in the streets, beggars. And now they're leading whole cities and leaders of businesses that are created within the community. So, I mean, they are very capable people, but addicted, that's all. So to see them and to struggle with this whole concept of calling them disabled people is a shock to us.
So it's that sort of social security type mentality in Australia.
This I'm entitled to this, I'm entitled to that, because of I'm alive, I'm entitled. I don't know what it is. And that's a new thinking. I've not seen that. In
Yes.
all the countries we're in, that's the first time I've seen that.
It's just on that sort of I'm entitled and the economic level of it. Have you got any sort of comparative concept of pricing, like the cost of alcohol in Europe and the cost of heroin in Europe, ice in Europe?
Yeah.
How do they compare with Australian?
I don't know about the street price of heroin and that. Alcohol in Europe is generally a lot cheaper than Australia. That's for sure. But it's and even you might say, well, hang on, hasn't France and Germany got benefits? Welfare. Yeah. They do, but they're very conditional. I'll give you an example. Germany says, okay, these are your benefits, and they're certainly not as generous as Australia. But as soon as that person chooses to go into rehab, they say, okay, we don't need these benefits, and they cut them off. Which is good. It helps us because if someone's living in community with the concept that you're in community, but you're expected to work, and we'll teach you if you don't know how to, because that covers your costs.
Yes.
See, the model here in general in Australia is, no, your welfare is going to cover the cost of rehab, so we'll pay for staff and all that. So we're volunteers. Okay. My wife and I have never taken a cent from the businesses, because that's not the purpose. The businesses, there's an ownership by the guys. And this ownership is so important because they know that the light bill will be paid by the fact that how many lawns they've mowed that week. So there's a connection between work and responsibility and covering your costs. So they're earning their way. Wherever we are in the world, we say, you come, it's free of charge. But part of it is working.
Part of the deal is working, right.
In the Australian context, it's, but I don't need to work because I've got money. I'll pay you for the rehab. We say, this is part of the rehab. It's part of the whole thing of you working. So that creates all sorts of messy ideas in people's head. For a while, we even just thought, well, let's just charge them. And if that's the way it's going to work in Australia and that's the model, maybe we should do that. We did it for about 6 months. We said, okay, you come in and we'll take 75%, 80% of your Centrelink.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, they became paying clients. In their minds, that, well, I don't need to work. Hey, I've paid my dues. I just want to sit around all day. And it started to destroy our whole model.
Yeah.
So we just cancelled that and said, keep your benefits, but you've got to work. So it's a continual battle.
And by the way, I didn't like the caviar we had last night.
Well, yeah. It's a little bit like that.
Yeah. That's
spoiled.
Yes. And that's actually quite troubling for the addiction scene in Australia.
It is.
And which is a large one.
It's covering up desperation.
Absolutely. Yeah, Lindsay, I think we've actually, and thank you so much, because we've actually covered some really, really core issues, albeit much of it in Spain, but totally relevant to here. Mm-hmm. And then you reveal at the end that Australia has actually put a stone in its own shoe and has got the potential to limp badly in the management of addiction.
Very much.
All right.
Yep.
Well, thank you once again.
You're welcome.
You've been watching Harmony and Diversity, and we'll be back next week.
Baha'u'llah, Shanti Om, Allahu